Path of Exile Expedition League 3.15 has been out for a week, and it's time for me to share my first impressions from a few builds that I've tested as beginner-friendly league starters, to varying degrees of success and satisfaction. Once again, I'd like to highlight that this is not a guide for any of these builds, it's just early impressions and possibly direction for my fellow beginners and casuals of Path of Exile. Hello and welcome back to the channel, I'm your host Gyro, and my goal here as always is to test different Path of Exile leagues and recommend the easiest, most enjoyable and casual friendly builds for you without pretending to be an expert of the game or someone who aims to crush the end game with some super overpowered and optimized builds. It's not what we do here. So today I will talk to you about 4.5 maybe builds that I've tried to push this Expedition League with and what conclusions I came to. Which ones seem to be the easiest and most newbie friendly in this much harder League 3.15, where lots of spells and builds have been nerfed substantially, if not to say to the ground. First build of interest to me, and that I'd rate reasonably highly on the scale of its easiness and beginner friendliness in Expedition League, is Storm Rain Ranger. Built around the new skill that they've added to Path of Exile 3.15, Storm Rain, I've enjoyed playing this build so far and could say that it's pretty easy to put together and succeed with if that's your thing. Storm Rain is the key ability that you will get only around level 28, which in this much harder league isn't a joke to reach anymore, especially with some particular builds that we'll be talking about shortly. But this build, also relying on Galvanic Arrow and Shrapnel Ballista totems, will trivialize some of the encounters that would make some of the early melee builds cry their eyes out. Overall impression from Storm Rain, once you get it though, is not that it used to be before 3.15, with some skills that made you suddenly feel quite powerful. So this new skill, Storm Rain, I'd say is okay, it's quite fun to use I suppose, but it's not super overpowered, and it's kind of almost close to feeling a bit underwhelming, without layers and layers of support gems being plugged into your gear once you have more sockets available. Obviously I don't have that gear around level 30-35 just yet. Second build that I haven't taken too far yet, but needed to offer kind of an honorable mention here, is the Shield Crush Marauder, relying very heavily in the early game on also the second skill, which is the good old Ground Slam. As this is not a guide, but just an impressions compendium only, I can simply tell you that playing a melee character in this really painful League 3.15 is not very much enjoyable unless you are simply hardcore and would just simply clench your teeth until you are later in the game, and once you've managed to put some passive skill tree points in, getting some much better gear too. That would certainly improve your play experience and will generally improve your life in the game. But in the early game that I base these early impressions on, almost every ranged build, physical or magical damage, felt better and much easier than melee, close and personal combat builds. And it would be hard to make those builds appealing to real beginners of Path of Exile, who perhaps joined the game only for this League 3.15 and who will be possibly quite disappointed with just how much butt kicking they'll experience from, you know, the most unassuming and basic rare yellow monsters wandering around the maps. Shield Crush is another new skill to the game, introduced to the game only this league, and it looked very interesting during the developer stream with Chris Wilson a week ago. It looked super powerful, which is why I wanted to try it. But even Chris said in his interview that those builds, everything that they've demonstrated, including Shield Crush, were builds at the maximum of their power to show players just what's possible. For the beginners of the game, that what's possible state of play is way too far off. And you know, the journey up there to the end game where these builds start shining would be quite painful, I would say. And even if it's fairly easy to play with Ground Slam or with Shield Crush in this particular case, I simply cannot see how it would be more enjoyable than the other builds that I'm discussing in this video. Build number 3, Holy Flame Totem Hierophant build, is one of my old favorites, and I feel safe with it and secure while everything is burnt to crisps around me. I don't mind relatively boring playstyles that totem builds are generally perceived as and known for in Path of Exile and among the community members. I personally make no excuses for being okay with those builds. I like to put totems into the ground and run away from danger while the totems deal with my enemies. During this early endgame level and build stage though, I don't even have multiple totem support added yet and only can have 2 totems out at a time, which makes this particular recording and this particular stage of the build looking quite boring. Even I would agree with that, so it might not be your cup of tea. But with all of that being said, I do believe that the totem-based Hierophant builds, Holy Flame Totem particularly, is probably the easiest, cheapest, safest, independent and noob-friendly builds out there for someone who wants to, so to speak, outsource the troubles of dealing with the enemies and with the mobs to their totems, rather than hitting things and being hit in the face. Finally, for our quick review today, I would like to mention my classic Summoner Witch build in the making. Started slowly in this build because of just how squishy the Witch is and how much harder the environment feels before you start outgearing the content and beefing yourself up with the layers upon layers of useful passive skills. As soon as you get Raging Spirit and Phantasm support though, your life improves dramatically and your 3 skinny zombies start living a little bit longer and start dealing with the enemies a lot more effectively. And you can see, even at this early stage of this build in the making, that you can rely on this quite easily to plow through the content and, you know, just following your generic summoner path outlined by the flashing nodes of your passive skill tree that you can highlight by entering the search term minion into the search bar at the top of the passive skill tree. I don't yet have any fully updated guides for the Expedition League 3.15 just yet, as frankly I'm spending quite a lot of time these days in Final Fantasy XIV, but I am still going back to Path of Exile now and then, and I'm glad that I'm landing now on 2-3 rather solid builds to take further slowly into the end game over the coming weeks. I hope that you have enjoyed this little overview. Maybe it gave you some food for thought, maybe it gave you some ideas. That was my only intention for this video. This is what I think would be among the easiest, cheapest, simplest builds to put together in this league. Clearly there are more builds to try and see just how fun they are in the league, but I think I'll just take my time with a couple of these, reach the end game maps with them, and then report my findings back to you, my friends, before diversifying possibly into other builds. Please subscribe to the channel to show your support and to not miss any of my further updates on these builds and more if this happens to be your cup of tea, if you enjoyed some of this today. And in the meantime, as always, I would love to hear your own impressions from Expedition League. What build did you choose for yourself? What did you go with? How did it feel to you? Do you recognize that the environment is much harder? Did you go ranged? Did you go melee? All of that is of great interest to me, and I would love to welcome your feedback as always and your, sharing your own impressions. And I'll be speaking with you again in a few days' time about something else, Path of Exile or Final Fantasy XIV related. I will say goodbye for now and talk to you soon.